and VR. I've looked at it from the standpoint of how do we improve productivity, how do we improve kind of our ability to communicate with clients and ultimately produce better work. And what I came across this sort of construction productivity chart, and it kind of shocked me because if you look at these other industries, manufacturing, utilities, agriculture, and transport, you see that over time they've all kind of steadily increased as technology has made things easier and made each individual more productive. But somehow the construction industry has, not only is it kind of stagnated, but it's started to decline over the years, kind of gradually. So I started to overlay different information about what that could be, what are the causes of these increases in productivity. So in 1964, mainframe PCs began being used in enterprise. So I can kind of start to see increases in productivity from that, as well as graphical user interfaces, and then building information modeling tools. So within architecture, we like to model things in 3 dimensions, but we like those 3D models to contain more than just geometry. Things like a wall knows that it's a wall and a floor knows it's a floor instead of being just sort of a cube or sort of a surface. So that's what BIM tools are. And then ultimately World Wide Web. And all of these innovations have led to increases in productivity, increases in output, and ultimately made each individual more productive. And so what I'm seeing is, as virtual reality and augmented reality shortly after, as they've sort of hit the market, we're trying to use that as sort of the first springboard to really start to leverage this technology into helping architecture and construction actually improve productivity and not just productivity, but the quality of the output. So the better we can communicate with our clients, the better that we can design. So ultimately that comes down to that question, how can we leverage this technology to actually aid the process? So I think right now, and maybe my theory for why construction is struggling so much is it complicates things. It sort of adds new dimensions that the industry can't necessarily keep up with. So with Bevel, our goal is to kind of streamline this process, make technology as easy as possible. So this all came about with the idea of a bevel being used to soften the edge of a piece for the sake of safety, aesthetics, or to facilitate joining. Now, joining of what? We like to join things like architecture and technology being our kind of primary focus, but it really comes down to data and design, as well as user and experience. I mean, these things are really what this technology is the strong suit. It really allows us to more intuitively interact with our data. So it's really a kind of a useful tool in that way. I'll start with kind of a quick case study. This last fall. I collaborated with a construction and architecture firm to work on this design installation around the themes of power and community. So if a picture's worth 1,000 words, let's say, then what's that price of an experience? How do we really capture what that value is? So with this technology, this is kind of a few different design iterations that we were kind of thinking through for this design installation. It started out with these ideas of interactive mirrored displays, and ultimately we wouldn't be able to mock any of this up. The total budget for this project was $2,000 that all of us had sort of committed to. And even mocking this up would have cost more than that budget. But with VR, we were able to kind of quickly and easily iterate through these design options. So 400 square feet of real mirrors would have cost $3,300. Eventually, we shifted our idea around these mylar balloons and this reflectivity. But even that would have been, 3/4 of our budget just to mock it up and decide if that was the direction we wanted to go in. But VR let us quickly look through a number of design iterations and ultimately decided that we wanted to move in a different direction. And so finally, we got to this area where we were able to kind of simulate and then apply our kind of virtual reality models and experiences to learn how to actually produce this final quality product. And so you can kind of see what we were working with on the right, and then what our final result was on the left. This whole process, it was all kind of born out of the idea of we needed to test a variety of different designs with the freedom and flexibility to be able to prototype and iterate and really push the design as far as it could go before we decided whether or not we wanted to execute. And so it was really key that we were able to use VR within this process to sort of go through all of those, kind of figure out all the bad ideas, and then really hone in on the good one that we ended up building. So this is kind of an example. Let me see if this link will work. I have no idea if you guys can see this. But this was sort of a 360 photo. I don't know, can you guys see this? It's kind of rotating around. Yeah. Maybe wave if you can. So the idea was that we kind of created this mesh, and then over time people would, actually, let me jump back to my presentation. I haven't used this Zoom thing before, so it's a little tricky for me. Okay. Whoops. The idea was that we sort of built this installation, but we were able to test it fully long before we built it, so that we could really hone in and make the most use of the best use of our limited budget. So all of this was thanks to free game engines. You may be familiar with Unity. I see some of you are using HoloLenses, so I imagine you're probably pushing forward with that. As well as Unreal Engine. That's something that we push on quite a bit as well. And at Bevel, we like to remain software agnostic. So we're constantly exploring what we can do with these tools and how far we can push those to solve the problems of our clients. So this is just an example of kind of an interior scene that we were doing, kind of studying a condo and different kind of placements and settings of the backdrop materials and whatnot. But ultimately, what is that realism without a purpose? I mean, it's one thing to make a pretty picture, but it's another thing entirely to make something that's truly useful, and useful in a way that really leverages the strengths of virtual reality. We get a lot of requests for, let's make a pretty picture, a pretty experience, but ultimately if a rendering or a video or something can solve that problem, then that's not that interesting to us. This was a problem that really kind of we could sink our teeth into, because this is actually another OSU alumni or group of alumni formed a company, Gray Pants, and they're a lighting design company. And the problem that they have is they go to trade shows and expos, and they try to show off their work. But how do you show a 20-foot tall chandelier when you're in a crowded expo hall? There's really no way to capture that experience. And so we created this VR kind of showroom for them, where it's easy for them to kind of set up in a trade show environment with a small kind of 10 by 10 booth, and then they can let the general public go in and experience their designs in kind of the best possible environment. And we've gone through a number of different iterations of this, but this is kind of what I was wanting to show, is just a variety of different products. So as you can see, on the top right is their actual workspace, and it's they kind of had an open house where people could explore, but they use these sort of collections of small lanterns to make these like clouds of or like large kind of chandelier kind of experiences with their lighting. But the only way to really get that experience is to go to their physical space and see for yourself. So that's why we created this kind of VR experience. And you can see on the right, or sorry, on the left, him kind of looking up at his lights and seeing how the shadows cast on a wall, and those kind of experiential features that you wouldn't really be able to capture. You may be able to see kind of in the background here, there's a kind of a small booth with like a miniature of one of their chandeliers, and that's really their only option at this point until we created this VR experience for them. So the next thing I'm going to show you is a couple of different hackathon projects that they started out as kind of quick weekend projects that we wanted to execute on. We wanted to solve a really specific problem, and each one is kind of a different focus, but this one was a campus center. So the idea is we wanted to be able to build kind of an urban planning tool where architects or designers could load in 3D models, place them around kind of quickly and loosely, and then experience it at a variety of scales. So let's see if this video works. So jumped into a kind of a large scale. We're able to walk around the project. And then of course it's all, this was all built in Unity, so we added in a lot of little interactions and made it as customizable and useful as possible. And then you can jump in at 1-to-1 scale and kind of see what kind of space that you've created. Ultimately, that's what we focus a lot on with our VR and AR is really leveraging that sense of space and scale that you get from these technologies. This next one was kind of a fast turnaround as well. We had a client who had approached us for a number of kind of different projects, but it all went to they needed to be able to essentially mock up these exam rooms or operating rooms, different medical spaces, and kind of shift things around and particularly it had to be accessible to nurses and doctors and people that weren't really technology savvy. They had to be able to kind of quickly and easily interact and use this. So this one was an Unreal project, but you can see everything's sort of interactive. We also made everything kind of, the large objects you kind of place as normal, but everything that's hosted to a wall, because we were trying to make this process work within our architecture software, we make everything sort of snap to different pieces of geometry so that they didn't have to worry about placing it just right. They could get it essentially how they wanted it and use their own body to kind of measure those proportions and find what feels right to them. So what was really great about this is we were able to run through a number of different iterations with different medical staff, and they were each able to kind of arrange this space in a way that fit them best. And then we were able to kind of overlay all of this data on top of each other and see if there were patterns or tendencies that started to happen as far as people tended to put, let's say, the like wipes in a particular area because they needed to be near the sink or things like that. So yeah, and this ended up fleshing out into a full project that we now have kind of licensed to different medical companies that we work with. But ultimately, our goal is to leverage kind of the ease and the intuitive controls of VR to allow people that have no experience with technology or 3D modeling to be able to kind of build and experiment and leverage this sort of three-dimensionality of it. So, and then finally, another kind of medical tool that we've kind of worked on. This was another kind of weekend hackathon, kind of fast turnaround project. Was again in response to a lot of interest in VR being able to help visualize and simulate patient flow through a hospital, or in this case, I mean, really it can apply to anything. But let me just kind of start it out. It's a really simple project, kind of again built in Unreal, and the premise was that you can drop in those little kind of green floating kind of waypoints. You can drop those throughout the site, and then these pawn people will just essentially run between them wait a certain amount of time, and then run back. And you know, it starts out really simple like this, and this again, this was just kind of a 2-day turnaround at a hackathon, but we've since fleshed it out into a much more robust kind of simulation tool where now they can test all kinds of processes and procedures simply by just putting these waypoints in just the right places and setting how long they wait. Now they can test like full hospital staffing and how long it takes a nurse to go from the waiting room to pick up a patient to the exam room, and then throughout their whole day. And we can just fast forward and see a lot of this different information. And kind of really the key is just to be able to make better decisions and make those decisions much faster and with more information behind them. So yeah, one of my favorite quotes by Maya Angelou: "If I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better." And ultimately, that's kind of where VR comes into our practice. Is we kind of help our clients know better, so that then they can improve their process or products. And that's really that's all I have as far as slides. But I'm happy to answer any questions specifically relating to the hackathon that you guys are participating in, or VR in general, or AR. Here, let me jump back. Yeah, so if you guys have anything you want to ask or talk about, I'm all ears. I'm not sure if I can hear. It seems seems pretty quiet. Great. Well, one thing I'd like to say, just since you guys are in the first hours of the hackathon, is just from my own experience doing these kind of quick burns, is really it all comes down to kind of managing your scope for these projects and really honing in on that one piece of the problem that you're trying to solve. Because you only have a few hours at this hackathon and as a team to kind of work together. So really be sure you're drilling in on that kind of the core functionality that you're trying to kind of build. And then once you kind of lock that in and get that working, then you can kind of expand from there. But that's one of the problems I see with a lot of hackathons when I kind of see other teams, is they kind of pick this thing and then they kind of expand and come up with newer and cooler features that they want to add in. And it's very it's great to be able to kind of brainstorm and come up with all these ideas, but always kind of drill it back down to that core solution that you're trying to solve for. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thanks a lot, Simon.
Yeah.
You guys have any questions for me? Nope. All right.
Cool. Well, yeah, best of luck, guys. I'll see you around.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, this is, I'm still waiting on something down there. Yeah, the problem was the SDK has to be installed. Like, so that's how you Sure, that's yeah, I can see that. Thank you.
So one more time, and so experience, and so in order to fully satisfy, you need to have good customer service.
So you guys can see what I'm saying, right? Yeah. Sure.
Where's that? This one?
So I broke it down to how do we transition.
So how should the game
No,
cross shows
the
so employees, teachers, behavioral experience. Then let me do the thing.
There we go. I already compared it. We have done our work.
I already compared it. The issue is that internet is so slow. Yeah, it's not able to post. The other one, it's posted already. Would you saw the other one? It's hackathon. How is the?
Oh, no, that's the profile picture.
Okay.
Experiences so that they internalize it and that they know it, but so it's not so you get away from it, it's just how you motivate or how you treat it. And I think that's the thing that's different, where these rewards is, I think that's what that is.
Oh, so right there.
So that's where, like, we can, I can send.
Play it.
Sweet.
Okay, so like, right?
Right here.
So now I can go to
Yeah, that's
virtual.
set up for.
For
So as
virtual.
you see,
Wow.
the rest of this would be.
I would ask them.
Can you mess with that?
Because this one looks okay.
Yeah.
This one is okay.
I'm trying to describe what you're saying, so that's
The one I uploaded from the computer.
So basically,
Basically this and
we have the employee right here with the HoloLens, right? And they've got their stuff that they've got to put up here. Or put in the right spot. And so like, we would just measure how many